What if the person leading the search was the same person who made her disappear? What if every tear, every press conference, every desperate plea to the public was a performance? What if the monster wasn't a stranger lurking in the shadows, but the man who was supposed to protect her? This is the story of a little girl named Lily Hargrove, 8 years old, brown pigtails, a gap-toothed smile that her teacher said could light up an entire classroom. And this is the story of her father, Richard Hargrove, a man the town of Cedar Falls trusted completely, a man who stood in front of cameras and wept, a man who organized search parties, printed flyers, and begged the community to help find his daughter, a man who knew exactly where she was. Welcome to Story Labs. Stay with me, because this story doesn't go where you think it's going. It was a Tuesday morning in October when Cedar Falls woke up to the worst kind of news. A child was missing. Lily Hargrove had not shown up to school. Her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had called the house at 9:15 a.m. when Lily's seat sat empty for the third time that week. No answer. She called again at 9:30. Still nothing. By 10 a.m., Mrs. Patterson contacted the school principal. By 10:45, the principal had called the police. And by noon, Richard Hargrove was standing in his driveway, hands trembling, eyes red, telling Detective Sarah Moss that he had no idea where his daughter was. "She was here," he said, voice cracking. "She was right here last night. I put her to bed. I kissed her goodnight. She was right there." Detective Moss studied him carefully. In her 15 years on the force, she had learned one brutal truth. Parents who lose children fall apart in very specific ways. The grief is raw, uncontrolled. It moves through them like a current they cannot stop. Richard Hargrove was crying, but something about it felt rehearsed. She filed that thought away. For now, there was a child to find. Cedar Falls was the kind of town where people still left their doors unlocked. Population 4,200. One elementary school, 2 diners, a hardware store that had been in the same family since 1957. The kind of place where everybody knew everybody, and everybody definitely knew everybody else's business. So when word spread that Richard Hargrove's little girl was missing, the town mobilized within hours. Volunteers gathered at the community center. Flyers were printed with Lily's school photo. Her gap-toothed smile stared out from telephone poles, grocery store windows, and gas station pumps. The local news sent a crew. Within 24 hours, the story had spread to the state level. And Richard Hargrove stood at the center of all of it. He was everywhere. Every search party, he was at the front. Every press conference, he was at the microphone. Every candlelight vigil, he was the one with tears streaming down his face, holding a framed photo of his daughter, begging anyone who had information to come forward. "She's my whole world," he told a reporter from Channel 7. "She's all I have. Please, if anyone knows where my baby girl is, please bring her home." The reporter cried on camera. Half the town cried watching it. Detective Moss did not cry. She sat in her office and watched the footage 3 times. And each time, she noticed the same thing. His eyes. When a parent is truly terrified, their eyes move. They scan. They search. Even when they're talking, some part of them is always looking, always hoping, always desperate for any sign. Richard Hargrove's eyes stayed perfectly still. The investigation began, as it always does, with the basics. When was Lily last seen? By whom? What was she wearing? Did she have friends she might have gone to? Family? Had there been any unusual vehicles in the neighborhood? Any strangers? The answers came in quickly, and they were deeply troubling. Lily had been seen by her neighbor, 72-year-old Eleanor Briggs, at approximately 6 p.m. on Monday evening. Eleanor had been watering her front garden when she noticed Lily in the Hargrove driveway. She was carrying her backpack, Eleanor said. She looked scared. Scared? Detective Moss leaned forward. Scared of what? Eleanor hesitated. Scared of him, she said quietly. Of her father. He was standing in the doorway, watching her, and the way he was looking at her. She shook her head. I don't know. It just didn't sit right with me. I almost called out to her. I wish I had. That was the last confirmed sighting of Lily Hargrove. 6 p.m., Monday evening. Richard Hargrove reported her missing at 11 a.m. Tuesday morning. That was a 17-hour window. 17 hours, and a father who waited until the next morning to pick up the phone. When Detective Moss confronted Richard about the timeline, he had an answer ready. Too ready. I thought she was at a sleepover, he said. She sometimes goes to her friend Madison's house. I assumed that's where she was. I didn't realize until morning. Moss pulled out her notepad. Which friend? Madison who? Madison Clark. They go to school together. Moss called Madison Clark's mother within the hour. Madison had not had a sleepover that night. Madison and Lily, according to Mrs. Clark, had actually had a falling out 2 weeks earlier and hadn't spoken since. Richard Hargrove had lied. It was a small lie, the kind that could be explained away. But Detective Moss had spent 15 years learning that small lies, in cases like these, were never really small. She issued a warrant for Richard Hargrove's phone records. And then she waited. The phone records arrived on Thursday morning, 48 hours after Lily was reported missing. Moss sat at her desk with a cup of coffee and opened the file. She expected to see calls to friends, family, maybe a few searches about what to do if your child goes missing. What she found instead made her set down her coffee cup very, very slowly. On Monday night, between 7 p.m. and 9 p.m., Richard Hargrove had made 11 calls. Not to friends, not to family, not to any number that appeared anywhere else in his recent history. All 11 calls were to the same number, a number registered to a prepaid phone, untraceable, purchased with cash. And at 9:47 p.m., a text message had been sent from that same prepaid number back to Richard Hargrove's phone. 3 words. She is safe. Lily Hargrove wasn't abducted by a stranger. She was hidden, deliberately, carefully, and her father knew exactly who had her. Detective Moss called her partner, Detective Ray Colton, into her office and closed the door. She slid the phone records across the desk without a word. Watched him read them. Watched his face change. He knows where she is, Colton said. He planned it, Moss replied. The question was no longer whether Richard Hargrove was involved. The question was why. Why would a father hide his own daughter? Why stage a disappearance? Why drag an entire town through the agony of a missing child investigation when the child wasn't actually missing at all? The answer, as it almost always is in cases like these, lay buried in the past. Detective Moss began to dig. Richard Hargrove, 41 years old, had moved to Cedar Falls 6 years earlier with his wife, Angela, and their then 2-year-old daughter, Lily. On the surface, they looked like any other young family. Richard worked as a project manager for a construction company. Angela taught piano lessons from home. They bought a house on Maple Street, joined the local church, made friends at the neighborhood barbecue. But 18 months after they arrived, Angela filed for divorce. The proceedings were, by any measure, brutal. Angela Hargrove alleged in court documents that Richard was controlling, manipulative, and emotionally abusive. She described years of isolation. He had cut her off from her friends, her family, monitored her phone calls, controlled the finances. She said she had been trying to leave for years, but every time she tried, something stopped her. Court documents don't lie, but they don't always tell the whole story either. Richard contested every allegation. His attorney painted Angela as unstable, vindictive, a woman rewriting history to win a custody battle. And the battle, when it came, was ferocious. Both parents wanted full custody of Lily. The judge, after months of hearings and evaluations, awarded primary custody to Angela. Richard was granted supervised visitation every other weekend, with a custody evaluator present for the first 6 months. Richard Hargrove did not take this well. Court records showed that in the 3 years following the custody ruling, Richard had filed 14 separate motions challenging the arrangement. 14. Each one alleging some new concern. Angela was an unfit mother. Angela was alienating Lily from him. Angela was exposing Lily to dangerous individuals. Every single motion was denied. But here was the thing that made Detective Moss's stomach drop when she read it. 8 months ago, Angela Hargrove had filed a new motion of her own. She was requesting a complete termination of Richard's parental rights. Her reason? Lily had come home from a visitation weekend, with bruises on her arms. The investigation that followed was inconclusive. Lily, then 7 years old, told investigators that she had fallen from a tree in her father's backyard. The bruises were consistent with that explanation. Richard denied any wrongdoing. The case was closed. But Angela had pressed on. She hired a new attorney. She submitted journals she had kept for years, documenting Lily's behavior after each visit with Richard. Nightmares, regression, anxiety, crying when it was time to go. A new hearing had been scheduled. It was set for 3 weeks from the Monday night Lily disappeared. Moss set down the file and stared at the wall. Richard Hargrove hadn't lost his daughter. He was about to, and he had decided that the law wasn't going to take her from him. The prepaid phone. That was the key. Someone had purchased it. Someone had received 11 calls from Richard Hargrove on Monday night. Someone had sent the text, "She is safe." And that someone had Lily. Moss and Colton began working every angle. They pulled surveillance footage from every store within a 30-mile radius that sold prepaid phones. They cross-referenced Richard Hargrove's known associates, his family members, his co-workers, his church contacts. On Friday afternoon, 72 hours into the investigation, they got their first real break. A gas station camera in a town called Briar Ridge, 22 miles north of Cedar Falls, had captured a man purchasing a prepaid phone 2 weeks before Lily's disappearance. The image was grainy, but it was enough. Moss recognized him immediately. His name was Danny Hargrove, Richard's younger brother. A man who, until this moment, had not come up once in the investigation because Richard had told police his brother lived out of state and they barely spoke. Danny Hargrove's last known address? 11 miles from Cedar Falls. Moss was already reaching for her keys. They found Danny Hargrove's house at the end of a dirt road, tucked behind a stand of pine trees. A beat-up truck sat in the driveway. Lights were on inside. Moss and Colton approached with backup. They knocked. No answer. They knocked again. The door opened a crack. Danny Hargrove, 37, unshaven, eyes red as though he hadn't slept in days, peered out at them. "Mr. Hargrove," Moss said carefully, "we need to talk about your niece." The crack in the door widened, and in that widening, Moss caught a glimpse of something that stopped her heart. A child's drawing, taped to the far wall. A yellow sun. A greenhouse. 2 stick figures. Underneath, in crayon, in the careful, slightly uneven letters of an 8-year-old, the word Daddy. Moss pushed the door open. "Lily," she called into the house. "Lily, honey, my name is Sarah. I'm a police officer. You're safe." A long silence, and then the sound of small feet on a wooden floor. Lily Hargrove appeared in the hallway. Brown pigtails, slightly tangled. Gap-toothed smile, nowhere to be found. She looked at Moss with wide, cautious eyes. She was unharmed. Physically, she was perfectly fine. Danny had been feeding her, letting her watch cartoons, telling her it was a special adventure, a secret, that she'd see her daddy soon. She hadn't been abducted by a monster. She'd been tucked away by an uncle who believed, genuinely and completely, that he was doing the right thing. Moss crouched down to Lily's level. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" Lily looked at her for a long moment. Then she nodded. And then, quietly, she said, "Is my mom scared?" Moss had to look away for a moment. "Yeah, baby. She's very scared. But she's going to be so happy to see you." Lily nodded again, slowly. "Can I call her? We're going to take you to her right now." Behind her, she heard Colton placing Danny Hargrove under arrest. But here is where the story takes a turn that no one in Cedar Falls expected. As Lily was being walked to the police car, wrapped in a blanket, clutching a stuffed rabbit Danny had bought her from a gas station, she said something to Detective Moss that stopped the entire investigation in its tracks. Moss had asked, gently, if she had been afraid, if she had wanted to go home. Lily was quiet for a moment, and then she looked up. "I didn't want to go back," she said. "Not to Mommy's house." Moss felt the ground shift slightly under her feet. "Why not, sweetheart?" Lily's voice was barely a whisper. "Because of Kevin." Moss looked at her. "Who is Kevin?" "Mommy's boyfriend," Lily said. Then, after a pause, "He scares me." Nothing about this case was what it appeared to be. That is the cruelest truth of what unfolded in Cedar Falls. Because in the rush to find Lily, in the righteous fury directed at Richard Hargrove for his deception, everyone had been operating on the assumption that the crisis was manufactured. That it was the act of a vindictive, manipulative father who couldn't accept losing custody. And it was that. Absolutely, it was that. But it was also something else. Detective Moss spent the car ride back to the station very carefully, very gently, asking Lily questions. She used the language she had been trained to use. Calm, open-ended, non-leading. What she learned, in fragments, between long silences, was this. Kevin Marsh, Angela Hargrove's boyfriend of 7 months, had been living in the Hargrove home for the past 3 months. Lily didn't like him. Lily was afraid of him. He had, according to Lily, grabbed her wrist once when she had knocked over a glass of juice. Hard enough to hurt. She had told her father. Now here is where the story becomes a moral maze that has no clean exit. Richard Hargrove, when confronted with what Lily had told him, had done what he always did. He went to the courts. He filed another emergency motion, alleging that Angela's boyfriend posed a risk to Lily. The motion was denied. The judge, who had seen 14 previous motions from Richard, saw it as more of the same. Harassment dressed up as concern. And so Richard Hargrove, a man who had spent years manipulating a legal system to serve his own agenda, had stumbled into a situation where the system was no longer listening to him. Possibly because of that same history. He had cried wolf too many times. And so, instead of going back to court a 15th time, he had called his brother. and they had made a plan. It was illegal. It was wrong. It was the act of a man who had long since stopped trusting any authority but himself. But tucked inside the wrongness of it was a girl who said she was scared, and a system that had stopped listening. Detective Moss sat across from Angela Hargrove in the hospital room where Lily was being examined. Angela was clutching her daughter's hand, her face still streaked with 3 days of tears. Moss chose her words carefully. "Angela, I need to ask you some questions about Kevin Marsh." Angela stiffened. "What about him?" "Lily said something to me about being afraid of him. She mentioned an incident with her wrist." Angela's face went through several things at once. Shock, confusion, and then, almost imperceptibly, something that looked like a shadow of recognition. "She never told me," Angela said quietly. "Kids often don't," Moss replied. "They don't want to upset their parents, especially when they know things are already complicated." Angela stared at her daughter. Lily was asleep now, finally, after 3 days, deeply and peacefully asleep. She looked impossibly small in the hospital bed. "Is she safe?" Angela whispered. "Has she been, did he?" "We're going to investigate," Moss said firmly. "Thoroughly. I promise you that." Kevin Marsh was brought in for questioning that same evening. He was cooperative. Too cooperative. He had an answer for everything. Lily was a difficult child. She had adjustment issues. The wrist incident was a misunderstanding. He was trying to stop her from running near the road. But when investigators searched the home, they found something. Marsh had a prior. Not a conviction. An accusation. From a previous relationship. A woman who had filed a police report 5 years earlier, alleging that he had grabbed her young son. The case had been dropped when the woman withdrew her statement. It wasn't proof. It wasn't a conviction. But it was enough. Enough to remove Kevin Marsh from the home. Enough to open a formal investigation. Enough that Angela, when presented with the information, asked him to leave without hesitation. "I didn't know," she kept saying. "I didn't know." Richard Hargrove was arrested and charged with custodial interference. His brother Danny was charged as an accessory. Both men faced real legal consequences. But here is what happened in the weeks that followed, and why this case became a subject of debate that reached far beyond Cedar Falls. At Richard's arraignment, Angela's attorney stood up and said something unexpected. She acknowledged, on behalf of her client, that Richard's emergency motion regarding Kevin Marsh had been filed in good faith. That subsequent investigation had validated the concerns raised. The prosecutor, to her credit, read the room. She agreed to reduce charges in exchange for a detailed account of Richard's planning and a formal acknowledgement of wrongdoing. The judge, in sentencing, did something rare. She delivered remarks. "This court does not condone what Mr. Hargrove did," she said. "It was reckless, traumatic for his daughter, and damaging to the trust of this entire community. However, this court also acknowledges a failure. A child came forward with a concern, and that concern was not heard. The system that is supposed to protect children did not protect this one. That is something we must sit with." Richard Hargrove received 2 years of probation, mandatory counseling, and a modified custody arrangement to be revisited after 6 months. Danny Hargrove received a suspended sentence and community service. And Kevin Marsh, pending the outcome of a broader investigation, was permanently removed from any contact with Lily. So what do we make of this? What do we make of a father who was, without question, controlling and manipulative, but who was also, in one specific instance, right? What do we make of a court system that was so conditioned to dismiss Richard Hargrove's claims that it missed the one claim that mattered? What do we make of a little girl caught between 2 parents who both loved her, in their different and imperfect and sometimes damaging ways, while neither of them fully saw what was happening in front of them? There are no clean heroes in this story. There are no pure villains. There is a child who was afraid and didn't know how to say it. There is a father who chose the worst possible way to protect her. There is a mother who was betrayed by someone she trusted, and who had to reckon with the fact that her daughter had been keeping a secret to protect her feelings. And there is a town that organized search parties and printed flyers and lit candles for a girl who was 22 miles away, watching cartoons and drawing pictures of a yellow sun. Lily Hargrove returned to school 2 weeks after she was found. Mrs. Patterson had put a welcome back sign on her desk. Her classmates had made cards. She walked in with her brown pigtails and her gap-toothed smile, and according to Mrs. Patterson, she sat down, looked around the room, and exhaled, like she had been holding her breath for a very long time. Maybe she had. 6 months later, the custody arrangement was reviewed. Richard Hargrove, after completing the first phase of his mandated counseling, was granted unsupervised visitation, 2 weekends per month. His therapist reported meaningful progress. Angela's attorney did not contest it. Angela began therapy of her own. She later said, in an interview with a local paper, that the hardest part of everything wasn't the 3 days her daughter was missing, as devastating as those were. The hardest part was understanding that her daughter had felt she couldn't come to her. That's the thing I'm working on, Angela said. Making sure she knows she can always come to me. No matter what. No matter who it's about. It's a small thing. And a monumental one. Cases like this one leave marks. On towns. On families. On the professionals who work them. Detective Sarah Moss was asked, in a department debrief, what she would take away from the Hargrove case. What it had taught her. She thought about it for a long moment. It taught me to listen to kids, she said. Not just about what happened to them, but about what they're afraid might happen. There's a difference. She paused. And it taught me that the worst lies are the ones that start from a real fear. Those are the hardest ones to untangle. Because somewhere inside the deception, there's something true. And figuring out which part is which, that's the whole job. This has been Story Labs. These stories don't end when the cameras leave or the search parties go home. They keep going. In therapy offices. In family courts. In school hallways and kitchen tables and bedtime conversations. They keep going because the people at the center of them are still breathing. Still healing. Still trying to figure out who they are and what they owe each other. Lily Hargrove is still out there somewhere. Growing up. Probably still drawing pictures of yellow suns. We hope, wherever she is, she feels safe enough to exhale. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories that refuse to let you look away, you know where to find us. Story Labs. Always searching for the truth beneath the truth.